I believe that it is safe to assume that all of us here, and certainly those watching on TV as well, are attempting to live a spiritual life. And, it is suggested that a spiritual life can be divided most simply into two parts, if you're seeking to live that. And the first is basically the nurturing of our own spirit. The calling forth and putting on of that which is referred to scripturally as the image and the likeness of God. That which is inherently within you, the divine blueprint, the Spirit of the living God that is dwelling within you and in whom you live and move and have your being. It is your God self, your spiritual self, your Christ self. It is your true spiritual identity that we are awakening to. And many of us have distant separations in consciousness from that, and it's a return. It's a journey, really, to awakening to the truth that God holds us to be and created us to express as. And so that's the journey, to some extent. Part one is becoming that, finding that, uncovering that. And then the second part is really then to move into action in regards to what you have learned, what you have discovered, and what you have become as you have gained the truth of who you really are. It's being useful to God in all of His creation, to this experience that we've been placed in. It's being a good instrument through which the divine may move then. Because part of our first part is that awakening to who we really are is removing all the blocks that stand in the way to a free flow of the divine to express through us as joy and peace and love and harmony and goodness in various forms. And so we are to be part of that and open to that in our everyday lives. That would be the second part. So the first part is put on the character and the likeness of the divine, of God, of Christ. The second is to demonstrate that in our lives on a day-to-day basis. Now that second part has sometimes been referred to as being of service. Service to humanity, service to others, being a light in the world, basically thinking beyond the boundaries of one's own self. The first part is pretty much, finding out who you are. The second part is, now let's give that away. Let's give the God that is within away in various ways. And today is, at our ministry, of course, we're focusing on the idea of loving service and acknowledgement and gratitude of our volunteers and those who are. And we have a special activity planned later today, of course, and all of that we've talked about. But although we may think of being in service as something that we give basically like to a church or a not-for-profit or a worthy cause or an organization that is about, doing well and helping others, that's all true. That is of service. But the truth is that we all are given opportunities and situations and circumstances along each and every day to basically serve and to help others in our daily lives. It may be no more than opening the door for a stranger. It may be no more than being a courteous driver and not honking when you normally do, or other gestures. It may be, smiling at someone that you don't know walking down the street. Just giving that light, if you will. Another way of addressing what that first part of living a spiritual life is to say that basically it is about opening your heart. It's all about opening your heart to the realization that love is wanting to pour through, and out of love comes the experience of oneness. Those are energies. And so it is a dynamic of learning to be led by the heart and enter into expressions of knowing that basically we are love. Love is what we are, and we are really one. And let me give you an example of how a person can come from the heart spontaneously in the moment and be a great assistance. There's a story that my dear friend and prayer partner, Reverend Roger Teal, who is a senior minister at Mile High Church in Denver, Colorado. We pray each Saturday night. He's a beautiful soul. And he likes to tell this story about himself as it relates to an experience he had where someone reached out to him and touched him, and he's always remembered that. Anyway, Roger tells about the time he was a young guy. He was still in high school. He was only like maybe a sophomore or a junior in high school. And he was admittedly so very shy, very insecure, self-conscious. He somehow got up enough courage to ask a girl to the prom. And he was extremely nervous. He hadn't dated this girl before. This was the first time to go out, and he wanted to make a good impression, and he was really, just beside himself. And have you ever been there? I remember those moments way back. But anyway, what he did was they went to a very nice, elegant restaurant, and first class, and where everything is very formal, and white gloves, and the towel over the arm back then. And anyway, Roger ordered a steak. And when the food was brought to the table and the steak was put in front of him, he went to cut it. And he apparently used the wrong knife or something. He may have used the butter knife instead of a steak knife or something. But when he cut into the first slice, the steak flew off the table and onto the floor. And so you can imagine how he felt, just horrified. Well, the waiter or the maitre d' there came rushing in, swooped in, scooped that steak up, and went to the table apologizing, for the steak not having been brought to the table with a proper plate that would hold the steak in. Please forgive me. It is our error. I will get you a new steak and a proper plate. And he, very sincere and all. And off he went, and brought him back a steak. And Roger said, this guy, he knew exactly what happened. And he had, all this heart and compassion to help him and to save him in just such a horrifying, embarrassing, humiliating kind of experience. And so he said, this was my angel. This man was an angel that appeared. And he's never forgotten that incident. He's never forgotten that man. He knows what that man looks like in his mind. He was so sensitive and compassionate, moved so spontaneously to take action that was heart-centered and of service to another soul. So this man was truly serving. He wasn't just doing his job that was required of him, the basics of seating people, getting them to the table, making sure they're fed, all of that. He was being useful in a very sacred sort of way. That is really what the heart is about. And one of the teachings that we received when I was in India at the Oneness University from Bhagavan, one of his teachings goes like this. He says, the awakened one responds from the heart. The unawakened one reacts from the head. Okay, so a lot of life, when we're in reaction, it's really the head. We're not anywhere near in the heart. If you're in the heart, it's going to be pure. Blessed are the pure in heart, as Jesus said. Okay, for they shall see God. So true service is a function of the heart rather than the head. And one is always led into some kind of a useful action and activity if they are centered in their heart. Martin Luther King Jr. Is quoted as saying, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. I love that line. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. And he goes on to say about that, he says, you don't have to make your subject and verb agree in order to serve. In other words, it doesn't matter your languaging or if you say things right or not. He said you only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. Well said. And he's saying it doesn't matter what a person's education is, what their station in life, what their status in life, none of that, that everyone can be great because anybody can be of service. And a person who is in service, that's where greatness lies. Now, Jesus said himself, whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. All right? That's saying a lot, being very, very clear there. Jesus understood that many of the true afflictions of societies were having to do with selfishness. The awakened and the unenlightened really have uprooted any of that from their heart and their consciousness. And actually, selfishness is said to be, by some, the source of all vices. And that the demonstrations of giving through love is the source of all virtues. And so that to diminish the one and develop the other should be the aim of anyone who is seeking to live the spiritual life and progress in consciousness. It's been said also that the highest virtue consists in the sacrifice of one's own interests for the good of one's neighbor without ulterior motives. In other words, there's things that we always want to do ourselves, for ourselves. that are always, what we're about. But if you can actually say, okay, I'm going to block out a certain amount of time, and maybe I have to sacrifice this which I like to do or that which I like to do, but I'm going to sacrifice a certain amount because I'm guided to be in service in some way, and allowing God to express through me. And that's what's being said there. And Jesus, it would seem, actually made that point in various ways in his teachings that you can find in the Gospels as well. The idea of going out of your way for a neighbor, or sacrificing your own interests for the good of one's neighbor. And you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus used to explain that, actually. And this is found in Luke, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. And it begins, really, that passage, with a lawyer asking a question, how do I inherit eternal life? And so they have a discussion, and the lawyer actually comes to remembering what Jesus has already taught and recites back, yes, it's, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy strength, and thy neighbor as thyself. And so the lawyer himself offered that. But then he came with another question, and that question was, well, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And so Jesus then answered that question by going into this parable. And the parable, which you're familiar with, but I'll share a bit of it again with you. And that is, there was a certain man that traveled down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thieves. And they beat him up pretty bad. And they took everything he had, and they left him half dead. And there was a certain priest that happened along the way, and when he saw him, he decided to pass by on the other side of the road. And then there was a Levite, and when he happened along as well, seeing the man lying there, he decided to pass by along on the other side of the road as well. Now, it's interesting to know that in Jesus' time, the road from Jerusalem to Jericho was known notoriously to be one of danger and difficulty. Everyone knew about that span of road between those two places. And in fact, it was known by the people as the way of blood, quote unquote, the way of blood, because so many were robbed and blood was shed along that roadway. So that was known. It's been suggested by some that maybe the thoughts that were in the mind of the priest and the Levite might have been, well, maybe that guy that's lying over there, he's faking it. Actually, this is a setup. He's going to jump up and, be all over me. That could have been in their mind. Another was that, well, maybe if I were to cross that road, there's someone who just did that and is still lurking around there, and they might get me, kind of thing. So their questions seemed to be, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? And the difference in that and the Good Samaritan was that the Good Samaritan came along and reversed the question. And his question was, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? Very different, isn't it? And it's very different from a head to a heart connection in terms of what's guiding you in any moment. That's not to say to throw yourself into danger or anything like that. We're not saying that. But we're really saying that one was really a rationale of the head, the other was, of the heart. And they're very, very different. And so whatever your analysis of this parable, it seems clear that, the message basically has come from your heart and not your head. Also, to be selfless as opposed to selfish. Also, to put others first, from a spiritual awareness of knowing that you actually are the other person, and the other person really is you. And as people evolve and grow spiritually, they come to that realization because we are all connected. We're all part of the body of Christ, the body of God, however we wish to speak or say that. And so if we're all one and we're all, we are that other person, then you could say that we are sacrificing our own interests for the best interests of another, which actually is in our best interest. Did you follow that? Okay. Okay. Because really someday, obviously we may find ourselves in a difficult situation and we don't want that guy to cross on the other side of the road. We want them to come from their heart, and we may need a heart connection. Same way that my buddy Roger needed in that moment and got it, and how beautiful that was, and something he remembers to this day as well. There's a story about a climber, a true story. He actually relates back to an earlier time in his life when he had signed up for the wilderness course in Colorado. And He was involved in some kind of a climb and hike he had never done before. There was lots of preparation. He says he had to buy special boots and socks and special fleece pullovers and pants and a backpack and all of these things that they were told to get. And so when he gathered all this stuff and he went to the leader who was leading this wilderness course, he met up with a group of complete strangers. And the leader then gave the group lots of information as to, what was ahead for them in getting ready for the trail. And then not only did they have to carry their own things in their pack, but then they distributed like community items and supplies, which was the food and the pots and pans and different things. They distributed them among all of the people in the group, so they'd all have a share in that. So they packed all that away. Once they were all packed, the leader said to them, form a circle with your pack. And put your pack down in front of you. Okay, so they formed a circle. And they said, okay, step to the right, pick up the pack, put it down. It's heavy, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Step to the right, pick up the pack, see how heavy it is, put it down. And they continued to do that all the way around until they had picked up everyone's pack, realized how heavy it was, and that we're now standing in front of their own. And basically what they were saying and telling them was, remember, everyone's pack is heavy. And this man said, I always remembered that. I never forgot that, he said, because it's so true of life. And that when a person is sort of clawing their way in the next step along the hike or the journey of their life, and they might hit, some really tough going someplace, that person might, have feelings of jealousy or get distracted by thoughts of unfairness, that how easy that other person seems to have it, and all that kind of thought that the head will take you into. And it's just not true, It was a reminder that everyone, no matter what their smiles and jokes may be, is under stress at various times in their life, and some rather severe, and that everyone faces extreme difficulty at some point in their life, that nobody's life is perfect, and to realize that everybody's pack is heavy, and sometimes it's heavier than other times, and to know that. And so that you should lend a hand, sometimes to lighten another person's pack, if you can, for it will be welcomed, because there may be someone who will lighten your pack along the trail someday as well. The Zoroastrians, it's interesting to note that at one time, all Zoroastrians, the men and the women, would wear around their waists a silk cord, a cord of silk, like a belt. It was called a zunar, Z-U-N-N-A-R, which was considered very sacred because it was of religious significance to the Zoroastrians. And from the beginning, those who were of that religion, it was customary to wear this, and still today, I guess, some still wear. They originally were from Persian, and then they took refuge in India, and some of the Hindus even took on some of that tendency of the belt or a strap kind of thing that represented the same idea. But basically, from the days of old, the devotees, what they would do is they would untie and tie this cord. So they would have it on them, and they would untie it, and then they would tie it. And that they would do that various times periodically throughout the day. It was part of their prayer process, okay? And that the word zunar, actually the moral meaning of that is service. And so it is said that things like a soldier, a policeman, a postman, a gatekeeper, a guard, various professions, when on duty, they have a belt. Sometimes the belt goes with a uniform, and it expresses that they're on duty, and they're not free to do everything that they may wish and want to do, but only that for which they have been assigned and appointed to do. And so this all meant and suggested that man, as the most intelligent of God's creatures, is not supposed to lead his life simply and totally as he wishes, but to consider the duty for which he was born also as being an aspect of it, and service that he is to render to God and God's creation. And this was why, and the role that silk cord played as a reminder, and that belts can represent the same. So from now on, if some of you go through the day and I see you, opening your belt and then closing your belt, it's a sign to me that you're saying, I really want to be in duty to God. I really want to render unto service and being service of the Spirit in me and of the heart. That's really what that was about for them. Because a man is apt to forget about those things and forget and get so wound up into one's own dynamics of life and living. And the idea that we are all servants of God, and we are put into situations and moments in time where we are to be of service. And sometimes we forget, too, how even a small moment, some way in which the light of God comes through us can make as big a difference as it does. We don't realize, we don't understand the reality of the impact that when we lift a person's energy just a bit, in some way, how that ripples on out. I came across a piece of writing by an author named James Blanchard Cisneros. And he has a book that is called You Have Chosen to Remember, A Journey from Perception to Knowledge, Peace of Mind, and Joy. That's his title. But in that book, there is a description of a mystical experience that he had. There was a vision that he was taken into. And it was rather profound for him. It had to do with an interaction that he offered an individual sometime that was of love and peace that he extended. And this is what he wrote about this. He wrote, I was shown how one individual interaction touched not only the person with whom I interacted, but flowed to those with whom they interacted, and so on. This is what he wrote about his mystical experience. I wondered how many people my one interaction affected, and in that one moment, I was brought into a stadium full of people. I was in such awe at the number of people that single interaction touched that I had to hold back the tears. And the angel smiled at me and said, no, not yet. He lifted me above the stadium, and there I saw what seemed to be 1,000 more stadiums filled with those my one interaction had in one way or another touched. I could no longer hold back the tears. Before this vision or experience, I believed that the only way I could make a difference in the world was by leading or serving a great number of people. But it was there that I learned about the magnificence of the moment, the importance of even the shortest conversation, the beauty of a kind glance, the value of a caring smile, the substance of a gentle touch, the magnitude of an honest compliment, and the magnificence of a warm hug. That was what he had to share. Quite an experience. The idea that one person who does one thing to lift another changes basically their chemistry, their energy. All of a sudden, a little more light goes on. Now, they're different as they go and encounter this person and this person and this person. It might be in the next 5 minutes, might be the next hour, might be the next day, might be for several days. Who knows? And then all of those people are somehow shifted and changed. And that's what's being said. I have a next-door neighbor who is a beautiful Asian man and father and husband. His name is Ping, and lives next door to us. We, some of you know, live on a small lake on the edges of Sugar Land. And we had a lot of rain recently, and there was... it flooded the lake, and somehow it plugged and clogged the outlet. So it rose up into our backyards. And once it receded, there was all this debris that it left. And there was a section between our fence that ends the yard and the water where it begins. And so there's sort of a little green belt there. And he was out there raking a couple nights ago and gathering up all the debris. And then he continued on into the space between my backyard and the water. And then he went to the nice lady elderly lady who lives on the other side of us. And he was there, and his sweet daughter, Sulin, came out looking for her father. She's a teenager, and she walked all the way along and said, Daddy, where are you? What are you doing over there? You know? And they didn't see me. I was in my yard. I wasn't hiding or anything behind bushes. But I heard the question. I didn't hear the answer. But the beautiful thing was, I'm sure he said, well, I'm doing a good deed. It's a neighborly thing. This isn't my yard, or this other person's on the other side of me, but I'm led to do this. And it's so fit even what, this week was about and coming into today was about, because I know that daughter of his is now really changed in terms of her perception and understanding of the value, because her father is a very sensitive and sweet man. And I know that the daughter is the same, and just all the good that can come as a result of that happening. every gift you offer a brother or sister is given and received by God. Just realize that. Every gift you extend to a sister or brother is really a gift to God. And, prayer for others is a gift. Some of us, we may not be able to do a lot of things physically, whatever, we're at that stage in our life, but prayer is being in service, of course. No gift is ever lost, and no gift is ever thankless. No gift is ever lost, no gift is ever thankless. William Penn is known for having said something about, pass